Thanks, Jeff, for the awesome introduction. So, yeah, I'm with Birds Canada. I'm the Marsh Monitoring Coordinator, and I'm excited to share with you all a bunch of information about the work that we do, the Marsh Monitoring Program, and particularly in this region of the Maritimes. I always like to start with a land acknowledgement. So Birds Canada's Atlantic programs operate on the traditional territories of the Wolastoqey and the Mi'kmaq people and the Wabanaki. And our work benefits immensely from the inclusion of Indigenous knowledge, and we are honored to collaborate with communities across the region to advance bird conservation. So, who here has heard of Birds Canada before? Yes. Okay. So, you know who we are. We're a bird research and conservation organization. We have programs across the country. We have a lot of stuff going on here in the Maritimes. So today I'm talking about wetlands and marshes, but if you like birds and you're thinking, oh, what can I do in my spare time? We have a lot of other stuff going on too. We have Maritime Swift Watch, the Nightjar Survey, the Owl Survey. So if you're interested, go check out our website and learn more about those programs as well. So I want to start by talking about wetlands. So what are these ecosystems and why are they so important? I'm going to do so much talking today that I'm going to ask you first. So when I say wetland, what comes to your minds? And there are no right or wrong answers here. So anything that pops into your head.
Wet feet.
Wet feet, yes.
Diversity.
Yes, diversity, yes.
Bodies of water, lakes, rivers.
Yeah, definitely a lot of water involved, yeah.
Wetlands.
Yeah, wetlands, yes.
And I just think as the season goes, the water level is always changing. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's wetter on the feet than other times.
Yeah, for sure, yeah.
Tidal.
Tidal, that's a great one for here in the Maritimes, yeah.
Stinky mud.
Stinky mud, lots of that, yes. Habitat, yeah, lots of wildlife, yeah.
Bogs.
Bogs, of course, yeah.
Did someone say biting bugs?
My goodness, you have no idea. Yes, biting bugs, for sure. Yeah, so those are all really great and right on the money. So this is sort of the definition that we work with. A wetland is a dynamic transition habitat between water and dry land. So kind of what Jeff mentioned, there's changes in water levels throughout the year, and there's like combinations of dry patches and wet patches. And so it's this really interesting kind of edge habitat where you get special adaptations for these conditions. So here in the Maritimes, we have four kind of big categories, and bog is definitely one of them. So 3 of them are inland, so freshwater wetlands, so marshes, bogs, and swamps. And these are kind of distinguished by the vegetation that you see, the water levels, the nutrient levels. So for example, a marsh, that's a very familiar word, I'm sure, for many people, but this is actually a permanently or temporarily flooded wetland that is dominated by cattails and reeds, so that kind of tall, dense vegetation. And here in the Maritimes, we are lucky enough to also have coastal wetlands. So we have these really important salt marshes. And these are tidally influenced, so they are dominated by species that have evolved to tolerate brackish or salty conditions. So why are wetlands so important? Well, one of the reasons is that they provide regulating and supporting services. What that means is there are a lot of abiotics, so non-living processes that happen in wetlands. Water cycling and nutrient cycling, erosion prevention, flood mitigation, those are all things that wetlands are really good at. So this is a diagram from our friends at Ducks Unlimited, and this really shows you all of the important things that are happening in wetlands. And these are really important for sort of beyond the wetland, even what's going on in other environments. Wetlands, of course, provide resources for humans. So an example here is the American eel actually spends a lot of its time in salt marshes, and the Mi'kmaq people have a very close relationship with the American eel, so that gives you a sense of, for thousands of years, they've been using wetlands and they've been fishing in them. And then we also have, edible plants like cranberries and medicinal plants like sea lavender. So, there are a lot of resources that wetlands can give us. And then, of course, we also benefit from those abiotic processes that I mentioned. We can use wetlands to help stabilize shorelines and prevent flooding. And there are even cases where you can build an artificial wetland and help process, snow removal water so that contamination does not enter waterways. So again, these are super important and amazing ecosystems. And then diversity, that was something that came up in our popcorn style discussions. So of course, a lot of things live in wetlands. Birds, yes, and I'll get more into that, I promise. But also lots of mammals and amphibians, insects. They're super, super biodiverse regions. And of course, I work for Birds Canada, and these programs are about birds. So I wanted to next go into wetland birds and what sort of species we encounter in wetlands. So a lot of different kinds of birds use wetlands. And when we talk about sort of niche partitioning, using different aspects of the habitat, that's how you end up with this amazing variety of birds that use wetlands. So everything from like a duck, like the American widgeon, and then a wader like a great blue heron, all the way over to ospreys and songbirds. And then we have this kind of nebulous, uncertain category that we call marsh birds. And a lot of you are retired biologists, so I'm gonna ask you if you have a guess of what goes into the marsh birds category.
Bitterns.
Bitterns. Mm-hmm.
Rails,
Rails. Yep.
ducks.
Ducks, not necessarily. So marsh birds, it's kind of a catch-all category, but the key is that they're quite shy and secretive, but they're super vocal. So these are birds that really prefer to be heard rather than seen. So you'll hear their calls coming out of the reeds, and you're very rarely going to actually see them. So bitterns, absolutely. Rails, absolutely. And then there's kind of a other miscellaneous group that also share these characteristics and are specialized sort of wetland breeders, which I'll get more into. So what is a bittern? For those of you who know your birds, you can tell right away they are herons. That's a heron body type with a long neck and a dagger-like bill. They're in the genus Botaurus, so they're all kind of evolutionarily related, and they're characterized by being camouflaged, so they have cryptic plumage. So you can see the American bittern is very brown, and when it stands in the reeds, you can't really tell that it's there. And they also have their booming calls, which I hope I'll be able to play for you in a second. So there are two species of bittern that live here in the Maritimes, the American bittern and the least bittern. These are actually quite different in terms of both their appearance and also their calls. So the American bittern is, again, it's kind of drab and boring. It's got these vertical stripes that helps it blend in, and it's kind of brown. It does have this black neck stripe on the side. The least bittern is a little more interesting. So it's paler than the American bittern. It's got fewer stripes. It's got some kind of orangey coloration, some rustiness in there, and then it has a dark cap and back. So pretty different in terms of coloration. But the key difference here is really size. So the American bittern is kind of a medium-sized heron. If you've ever seen a green heron, this is kind of that big-ish. It's about the same size as that. So it's definitely smaller than a great blue heron. The least bittern is quite tiny. So it is the smallest heron in the world. And you can see from the picture that you can just hold it in one hand. It's really cute. And it's barely bigger than that starling. So really that tiny size is great because it's able to perch on cattails and reeds, and then it just stabs at fish while it's holding on to these reeds, which it wouldn't be able to do if it was larger. So in terms of the calls that bitterns make, the booming of the bittern, there isn't really a good way to describe it because it's incredibly distinctive. So I hope that you're going to be able to hear it when I play it. So that's a weird call. It does not sound like a bird, right? It sounds like it's almost gulping. And it's got this very deep call, so low frequency call. Now, the least bittern is pretty different, actually, much higher frequency and more kind of frenetic.
Never heard that.
So you can sort of tell based on the calls that the American bittern is a lot bigger than the least bittern because the least bittern has a much higher frequency. It can't make that low sound, it's just too small. And the reason that bitterns have these sort of overall lower frequency calls is because they live in these marshy habitats with dense vegetation, and lower frequency calls carry through the marsh better. So this is how they're attracting their mates. So our next group is the rails, coots, and gallinules. So these are in the family Rallidae, and so they are, I like to think of them as water chickens. So they're kind of fat and chicken-sized. They've got long toes, which helps them to walk over mud and not sink down into them. They spend a lot of time on the edges of marshes. And so they're kind of a semi-aquatic. They don't spend a ton of time swimming, although they can swim, which is interesting. In the Maritimes, we have 5 species that can be recorded, although I will say the American coot and the common gallinule are pretty rare around here. They are more common west of us. So in Ontario and in the prairies, that's where they tend to breed. We do get a few observations every year here, though. The yellow rail is a nocturnal bird, so they do occur around here, but you're never going to see them unless you're out at 1 a.m., which I don't think many of us cherish that thought. So 2 species that you are going to see are the Virginia rail and the Sora. So the Virginia rail is kind of the odd one out of these rails. It's a little bit thinner, and its beak is a very different shape. So you can see it's longer and thinner than those of the other rails. And the reason for this is because it's actually a prober. So it sticks its bill down into the mud to catch its prey. The rest of these rails pick their prey off of the surface of vegetation or the mud or the water. So it's kind of got this unique adaptation. And if you know what the Virginia rail sounds like, it's another weird one. Most of these marsh birds are pretty weird with their calls. It kind of sounds like a pig, which is very weird again for a bird, and super distinctive. And they're also quite loud, so you're likely to pick them up in a marsh if they do vocalize. And then the most common rail that we get here in the Maritimes is the Sora, which is a beautiful bird, lots of interesting coloration there. But again, unfortunately, you're not likely to see it. but it is very vocal. So it's got two calls that it tends to make. One of them is a kind of descending, kind of horse-like whinny, and then the other is a two-note upward swoop. So I'm gonna play those. So again, that's very distinctive and much more high-pitched than any of the other birds really that we've heard so far.
If I'm just
Yeah.
butt in and say, I know that second call, I know there's times I've heard that somewhere and thought, I wonder what kind of frog that is, you know? Because
Yes,
I've been I'm a beginning birder for only 30 years, so I don't know these things. Yeah.
The number of times the other way, it goes the other way too. The number of times I'm like, oh, what bird is that? And then it's a frog, and I'm like, oh no. Yeah, definitely birds and frogs have some overlapping calls. And then, okay, we have this miscellaneous group of other marsh birds. And again, these are birds that are categorized as marsh birds because they are wetland breeding specialists. So a super good example is the black tern. So terns you think of as being coastal breeders. This is an unusual tern. There are only 3 terns in the world that breed in freshwater marshes, and that's one of them. We get some of them in our region, in the Chignecto area, not a ton, but you can see them. The willet is a lot more common, so that's a shorebird. That is a sandpiper, and it's a fairly decent sized sandpiper. The obvious, key defining feature is the black and white wing bars. So if you see it flying or when it's displaying like this, you'll know immediately what it is. And the reason it's called a willet is because of the sound that it makes. People say that the last 2 notes of its call sound like willet. So you can judge for yourself. I'm not convinced, but sometimes people try to come up with mnemonics and it doesn't quite work. So we also have the pied-billed grebe. So this is our only grebe that counts in the marsh birds category. They're quite secretive and they're quite small. They do this really cool thing where they submarine their bodies. So they submerge everything except for their heads, and it's like a periscope. And they do that when they're scared, which is a lot of the time. They're quite shy. And again, this is another weird call. I think it sort of sounds like a monkey, which is weird, but.
Sounds like a frog, doesn't
It does, it does.
There's a green frog in there too.
Yeah.
Banjo.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, that's right. Yeah, so then we have 2 songbirds. So the marsh wren is this really cute little wren. It has, if you know wrens, you know they have very musical songs. So it's got a very beautiful, complicated song. And it builds these nice little globe-shaped nests. And it prefers really dense vegetation, which is why, again, it's quite hard to see. And the Nelson sparrow is a coastal breeding specialist, and it's got this orangey face wash. It's kind of one of the prettier sparrows, in my opinion. And the call of the Nelson sparrow is kind of, people say it sounds like bacon hitting a hot pan. It's kind of like an insect. Does not sound like a sparrow. And that's a very familiar sound in salt marshes.
Did you hear it?
Oh, yeah.
So how are these marsh birds doing. So this is data from a report that came out last year called the State of Canada's Birds, which was a collaboration between Birds Canada and Environment and Climate Change Canada. I'm sure many of you are aware of it. So based on the State of Canada's Birds, it's kind of a mixed picture for marsh birds. So some of them are going up, about 35% have increased, 30% were stable, and then 25% decreased. So there's a lot of variation between species in terms of how they're doing, which is really interesting because these are all species that share the same habitat. And the patterns and threats also differ between regions. So here's Nelson sparrow again. This is a species that has 3 subspecies. So there's the interior in the prairies region, the Hudson's Bay subspecies, and then our Nelson sparrows, the Atlantic ones. So in the interior, that's a pretty large population. It's relatively stable, but it is threatened by agricultural development, unfortunately. In the Atlantic region, it's a much smaller population, it's much more vulnerable, and there are more threats to this population. So agriculture, yes, but also sea level rise and coastal development, because again, this is a salt marsh bird. So the more of the salt marshes disappear, the worse it's doing. So the fact that we have these regional differences is why local monitoring is really important. Monitoring in specific regions is what can tell us how we can direct our conservation attention best to help these birds. So I know many of you know your birds, so this may not be super relevant for you, but if you are first, starting out with your bird journey, or if you're not super familiar with wetland birds in particular, then we have this program called Marsh Watch. So this is an introductory program, and it's designed to teach you how to identify birds and amphibians by sight and sound. So we have 5 learning modules. They're recorded and posted online, and it's kind of a customizable program because you can decide how fast you do them. You can go back and rewatch them. If you're only interested in some of the species because you know the other ones, you can sort of tailor which learning modules you listen to. And we also have the guided walk section where you can get some more hands-on experience with identifying these birds. And those happen, right now they're happening in New Brunswick. We're hoping to expand to Nova Scotia, funding permitted. And the goal is that you become comfortable enough to submit a checklist at a wetland of your choosing where you record all of the birds that you see in here and the amphibians that you see in here. And of course the months to do that are the summer months, ideally June and July, because that's when these birds are vocalizing the most. So the content, we have kind of an introductory learning module. It goes into more detail about the wonder of wetlands and why they're so important. And then we have 4 ID sessions. And so these break down a certain number of bird species and amphibians, and we go into a lot of detail about the field marks and their vocalizations and their habitat so that you can really drill in to your brain how to identify them. And we also have a plant identification section in a couple of the webinars, and that is helpful if you are thinking about joining our marsh monitoring program, because there is a habitat survey component to the marsh monitoring program. So the species that we cover in Marsh Watch are, we cover our primary species for the marsh monitoring program, which are marsh birds. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And we also cover kind of common species that you would see in a wetland, and this is based on the data that we have gotten from our volunteers in previous marsh monitoring seasons. So the idea is if you do Marsh Watch, by the end you should be good to go to survey for the marsh monitoring program. So if you're interested in Marsh Watch, you can head to our website, and that's where you can find all of the necessary resources, the learning modules, information about marsh walks. Our database link is up there, nature counts, and then other resources for bird ID. And then that's the Nature Counts link if you want to go directly there. And questions, comments, concerns, you can send to my email. You'll see this again, so you don't need to worry about remembering my email. So I know that some of you at least are birders, so you may be ready to go right into marsh monitoring. This is our more intensive citizen science program. So it essentially consists of different routes, which are a series of point counts. So the points are separated by about 250 meters, and at each of the points you do a 15-minute point count. So you start with 5 minutes of silent observation, where you're just recording the birds that you see in here. And then 5 minutes of playback observation. So there are 5 species where we will play 30 seconds of their call, and then there will be 30 seconds of silence. And then you end with another 5 minutes of silent observation. So the reason that we use playback, which can sometimes be a little controversial, is because you're not going to detect these species a lot of the time if you don't play a recording of their vocalization, because they're content to just sit there in the reeds, never showing themselves and never vocalizing. So our approach is to use playback sparingly so that we can at least figure out if these species are present or not. The timing of our surveys they start as early as 30 minutes before sunrise, but they don't have to start that early. You just need to get your surveys done by 10 a.m. because, again, the birds, they have their own schedule and they're quiet by 10 a.m. So you're not gonna find them. Each route you survey twice a year, at least 14 days in between surveys, and surveys happen in the month of June. And again, this is because that's when the birds are vocalizing. They're trying to attract a mate. Once they've got a mate, which is usually by the beginning of July, then they go silent and you can't detect them anymore. So, I mean, you can extend your surveys through to July 15th if you have to, but you may not get as many of our target species as you would otherwise. So, for our primary species, which are 12 marsh birds, we have a protocol where we record each individual of each species. And we record every interval where we hear it or see it. So this is what a data sheet could potentially look like. And you can see it's not one line for the species Sora. Each Sora has its own line. And that's because we really want to get fine scale data of these individuals, how many are using a given marsh, where are they using the marsh, etc. So the primary species, again, you saw these earlier in the presentation, they should be familiar. It's the 12 marsh birds that are recorded in the Maritimes. And then our secondary species are any birds that are not those 12 species. And for secondary species, because we are not focused on them, we're not really monitoring specifically for them, we have a more simplified protocol where we record the number of individuals for a species for each of the 5-minute intervals. So you get a sheet that looks something like this, where you have a line for red-winged blackbird, and it's 6 individuals for the first 2 intervals and 4 for the last one. So fairly straightforward. And then once you finish your survey, you put it into Nature Counts. And Nature Counts is our database. It's where all of our citizen science data goes. So it's super useful because then we can do lots of analyses with the data. We also share Nature Counts data with scientists from all across the world. So it's a really great resource. This is what your data might look like if it was getting inputted into Nature Counts. It's fairly straightforward again, but the thing to remember is just that the primary species and the secondary species get inputted differently. That is usually where people get tripped up. If you do get tripped up and you do something wrong, it's not the end of the world. It's my job to go through and fix all the data at the end of the season, so I will let you know if something needs to be fixed. And then we have our habitat survey. This is fairly straightforward again. It's just one survey. Usually you do it on your second or third site visit. And we have sections A through D are the required sections, and then E and F are extra. So basically we're looking to gather some baseline information on the habitat at each point. So like the type of habitat, if there's any evidence of human presence, so like things like impoundments, we give you a list and you can just check off which modifications you see. The water regime, so is it a permanently flooded area or tidally influenced, etc. And then the percentage of the major habitat types. So that one's maybe the most complicated, but still it's pretty simple. We just ask you to estimate the percentage of the surface area of a 100-meter radius around the point that is covered by each of these major habitat types. And if you know your plant ID and you want to give us some extra information on emergent vegetation and non-emergent vegetation, then you can fill out sections E and F, but that is not absolutely required. So the importance of the marsh monitoring program, it allows us to track these very secretive species. Otherwise, again, we wouldn't know a lot about these birds if we didn't have a dedicated protocol to record them. And the data contribute to our understanding of long-term population dynamics and habitat preferences. And this information really helps us to inform our conservation decisions. So here's some data from the Great Lakes Marsh Monitoring Program as an example. You can see that the data that we collect allows to visualize population trends. And we can say, oh, things are not looking great for the pied-billed breed. Maybe that's where we should put our conservation attention. So I want to finish up by talking about specifically the Chignecto area and what we are doing with marsh monitoring in this region. We have a couple of projects that we're working on. So one of them is the community nominated priority place here. So a CMPP, for those of you who don't know, is a region where there are opportunities to recover species at risk. And they are determined by Environment and Climate Change Canada. So this is a project that is led by the Nature Conservancy. And the goals are to build community relationships and develop a conservation plan for the Chignecto Isthmus, build public awareness of the region and of the species at risk that are in need of conservation attention, and then deliver programming that benefits those species at risk. So the Marsh Monitoring Program, again, it collects data on the distributions and abundances of bird species, including species at risk. So of our primary species, there is one species at risk, which is the least bittern. Currently, it is threatened. But of course, every year with the secondary species, there are another bunch of species at risk that get reported. So this past year, we had another 8 species at risk that came in through our secondary species data. The other project that we're working on is Keeping Chignecto Connected, which is a multi-partner initiative to study and preserve ecological connectivity on the Chignecto Isthmus. So again, many of you probably know this, but this region, the Chignecto Isthmus, is an important ecological corridor. It's kind of a pinch point for the movement of animals. Of course, it is the only land that's connecting New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, right? So if animals want to move in between the two provinces, they're coming through the isthmus. And that's what this beautiful diagram from Canadian Geographic is showing you. Those blue lines are showing you how the animals are moving through the landscape. So this project, it's looking to assess connectivity, assess movement of animals across the landscape, and then work to procure lands and engage with landowners so that we can preserve as much wild habitat as possible on the isthmus, so that, again, animals like moose have wild areas that they can move through if they're coming through the isthmus. And there's also a strong indigenous land use and autonomy component to our work. So for example, we're working closely with Fort Folly First Nation. And the marsh monitoring program, again, it contributes this distribution and habitat association data for bird species on the isthmus, so we can identify, are birds getting isolated on certain marshes? You know, are there patches of habitat that are connected? Sort of what is the connectivity for birds on the isthmus? And then we can also assess responses to climate change and other risks because we have this long-term data set. Right now we have 14 years of data, which is pretty great. So right now we have 32 routes on the isthmus. You can see they're mostly clustered kind of around the Sackville area, the Amherst area, and then along the coasts. We have a lot of salt marshes that need surveying. And unfortunately, this is our current route coverage. So we only have 4 routes that are being surveyed on the isthmus. This is a problem because this is creating a data gap for us. And this is kind of a puzzle for us because when we look at our broader regional map, we see that there are other areas that have a lot better coverage. So for example, in the St. John watershed area, we have coverage going all up the river. So what we would love to see is similar coverage on the Chignecto Isthmus. So this is where you can get involved. So if you want to get involved in our marsh monitoring program, it's super simple. You just need to register for the program on Nature Counts. You can navigate to the link that I put up there. You can also just Google Nature Counts Marsh Monitoring. And once you've registered, you adopt your route. There's a route map on there under the My Data tab. You can see which routes are available and you can choose the one that is closest to you or that interests you. And then you just plan out your surveys, you review the protocol, and you're good to go. So it's very simple. And again, we're here to help you along the way if you run into any issues. If you don't see a route near you that interests you, but you think, oh, there's a marsh that I know that I go to all the time, where I've seen Virginia rails, I've heard soras, you know, you can let us know and we will set up a new route there. So we're always willing to accommodate you and your survey needs. So with that, I always want to thank our sponsors and our partners. We have a lot of great partners across the region, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Do you sign up for a year, or how does that work?
Yeah, so if you decide that you want to survey for 2026, then you will just adopt a route, and then you will survey for that year, and if you find that the next year you don't have time, that's totally fine. We have a lot of people who come in and out of the program, and we'd rather have you participate when you can, rather than not participate at all. Yeah.
Maybe a hard question to answer, but you said you had 14 years of monitoring, correct?
Yeah.
Has that data revealed any kind of trends for this reason? Anything you can pull out that's sort of interesting in terms of species abundance or diversity or?
So we actually are looking at doing our analyses in the next year. So we haven't looked at the data yet. We're hoping to do a project where we combine the Maritimes and we compare it with the Great Lakes region. So hopefully we'll get some interesting patterns of regional differences there. So that's definitely a future project.
So the survey routes, are they road based like the owl survey, or we actually trample through the swamp?
So there are a few that are trampled through the swamp,
Okay.
but we've made a concerted effort
Okay.
to make a bunch of new routes that are road based. A lot of people don't want to trample through the swamp, you know, so, and we totally get that. So yeah, most of the new routes on the isthmus are along roads.
in town, there's a lot of settlement ponds and things that for the municipal, sewers and stuff. Do those count as wetlands?
So, it would depend. So, technically a pond, because it's sort of permanently watery, all the time, it technically isn't a wetland, right? Because wetlands are these transitional habitats. Sometimes you can get some wetland habitat like on the edge, like you can get some marshiness on the edge of a pond. So it would probably depend on the given pond.
What about though, a lot of environmental architects are creating, dealing with gray water, going into ponds that then go into more marshy areas. So those transition zones, would they qualify then as wetlands?
Yeah, so those marshes that are coming out of, built environment, yes, definitely.
I noticed you had, when we had the percentage of 35% were improving, 30% were stable, and 25% were going down or something of the species.
Yeah.
What happened to the other 10%?
Insufficient data.
Ah,
Yeah.
so you don't know what's going on with those ones.
Unfortunately, yeah. So, and with marsh birds, that is a particular problem because a lot of them are so difficult to detect.
Yeah.
So, like yellow rail,
Oh, boy.
guessing a little bit.
Well, do you have special, I know the yellow rails have been heard on some marshes in the area. I don't know how often, or is there a protocol where either you or other people would go out specifically looking for yellow rails?
So in the past, Birds Canada has done ARU work with rails, so putting out recording units, and we've detected a few yellow rails with that method. We haven't done any actual, going out in the middle of the night to survey.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm surprised.
I know that.
Just take a couple rocks out with you and.
Exactly, imitate the call, yeah.
Here's your first volunteer.
Exactly. I know that other regions of Birds Canada have done work with, yellow rail banding, so I assume they have some experience with that, but I don't think here in the Atlantic we've done that.
Just wondering with the least bitterin,
Yeah,
it's very rare,
yeah.
but it doesn't sing very often. So are you getting many least bitterns?
So, no. This past year we had 5 individuals,
Okay.
which is, some years we've had 1, so 5 is better than 1.
And those are
Yeah.
detected by people hearing during the day?
Yeah, so actually, this past year I did a lot of surveying myself, and I had 3 least bitterns on my surveys. So you can hear them, but yeah, they're very rare.
Where were they?
Actually, East Amherst Marsh, I had 2 individuals in there. Yeah.
What about black terns? Are they still at Amherst Park?
The most recent place that we knew that they were was Missaquash.
Yes.
But they weren't there this past year, so we don't know where they've gone.
Yeah, they were seen, the Czech bird, they were seen just after the New Brunswick, Nova Scotia war, Great Missaquash, because they moved on eBird there, because they moved from, what was the name, there's DU Parliament in between New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, along the St. Lawrence Port Road. You go further enough down there, they used to be there, but this year they moved,
Yeah, exactly, yeah,
and there are not as many, I think maybe fewer, I don't know. I didn't see them, but we're reporting eBird.
yeah.
Have they been seen at White Birch?
No, well, I was there this year, I looked for them and didn't see them.
Yeah, I don't think they were there,
Yeah, a few years ago, yeah.
yeah.
But,
The program looks like, so the individuals kind of come into it and do
do it themselves, like train themselves with the modules, is that right?
Yeah.
And can you see how many people take part in that, or is it only when someone submits a data sheet that you know that they've kind of done, or is there a registration process online first, and then you can, what does that work?
There isn't a registration process, but we can see site visits and the number of plays of the videos.
Oh, okay,
So we can track engagement that way.
okay.
Yeah.
And then what would you count as successful in terms of how many people actually?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I honestly, I mean, this is a new program, right? So we don't know how many people we're gonna get participating, like 40, 50, I don't know. You know, in Saskatchewan, in the prairies, they have synchronous webinars, so you can actually ask questions to my colleague who runs it there. And they get really good engagement there. They get like lots of people signing up, but yeah, we're not sure. We're still rolling it out, so I think this will be a good kind of beta test year to see. You know, first year, are people picking up on this? What do we need to do to get more people involved?
And a year, sort of, is it a full calendar year or sort of just a season, like a sort of the May, June, July, or what is?
So, I mean, in terms of the learning process, you can do that whenever,
Yeah.
right? You know, if you have a spare moment. The surveys and the marsh walks, those are happening in June, July, August, when the birds are actually here.
So it's tricky to involve, like I'm thinking high school students, it would be so cool, but it's happening during their,
Yeah,
yeah.
unfortunately, yeah.
Well, July would work. You could take them out in July.
High school students? Well, you could if they were not like working, or, you know,
Right,
like,
right.
that's the thing, and they go away and they do things in the summer. They're not captive like they are in the school year, which would be like needs to be like a
Yeah.
beautiful program for them in the school year.
Well, June, you have them in school.
Kinda. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, I'm just sort of wondering what you were thinking, like
Yeah.
what would you peg as success, or what are you hoping, like in your hopes, like how many volunteers would you sort of pull in, and then, you know, in your dream of dreams, what kind of data is pouring in for you?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the marsh monitoring program, we are hoping to see dream of dreams would be to have doubling of participation in the program this year. And you know, we had a substantial increase in 2025, so we know it can happen. And we're doing lots of outreach like this, where we're going to people who might be interested and saying, hey, you know, there's this great program. Which we know that is successful. People, a lot of the time, they just don't know about our program, right? So we're doing hopefully the right things. Yeah, and then we have our route map is we have a lot more sites now, so we're hoping to see, you know, a lot of those sites get adopted.
Following up on Lucy's thoughts, have you brought a presentation to schools?
We have not done schools yet, so Marsh Watch would be a good program for school-aged children for
Yeah.
sure. The Marsh Monitoring program is a little more complicated. I think high school students could probably handle it, but
Or
yeah.
you could have them paired with a regular,
Mhm.
with an older, more experienced person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially if they can hear things that perhaps others can't
Yeah.
hear. I might not
Young
catch,
ears,
I
yeah.
might not catch the Nelson sparrow,
Right.
but most
Yeah,
of the
yeah.
others I think I would catch, but.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
If you use something, if you didn't like actually hear the bird, but it picks up something like Merlin picked it up, would that
Oh.
be valid data?
So if Merlin picks it up but you didn't hear it, my rule with Merlin is you have to hear it, right? And you have to be able to, you know, compare. If you have the recording of Merlin and you listen to the recording and you listen to a bunch of, you know, audio clips of the species and you say, oh yeah, it does sound like that. maybe that's okay. The issue with Merlin is it makes mistakes,
Yeah.
right? So we never want to be relying on Merlin in the field because sometimes gives you the craziest identifications ever, right? So, yeah, we would prefer that you yourself can detect it.
Like if you get a road runner in the marsh, and you might want to question it.
Yeah, exactly.
Or an ostrich.
An ostrich, exactly. What?
I had lots of other questions.
That's good, that's good. Here.
Can't think of them.
Gwendolyn, I want to thank you so much for coming,
Oh, you.
especially on short notice. And so we're giving you some of our branded,
Oh, beautiful.
for,
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.